The story begins with a billionaire named Charles, who travels with his wife to the mountains of Alaska for a special photo shoot. His business empire is thriving, and he has so much money that he could quit working and still live comfortably for the rest of his life. Wanting to create lasting memories, Charles brings his wife to one of the coldest places on Earth and hires an entire crew to assist with the shoot, including a photographer, an assistant and several support staff. They board a plane and head deep into the Alaskan wilderness. In the middle of the icy mountain range, Charles has booked a remote resort for the team to stay in. After a long journey, they finally arrive. The owner greets them and explains several rules, warning that the area is filled with polar bears. Any food left out or any unlocked window could attract them, and a curious bear could easily break in. Hearing this leaves everyone uneasy, but the owner assures them that as long as they follow the rules, nothing will happen. Charles and the others return to their rooms as the temperature drops sharply after sunset. Later that night, Charles can't sleep and feels hungry, so he grabs a lantern and heads toward the kitchen. When he arrives, he notices an open slab of meat and the door is left unlocked. He remembers the owner's warning about bears being drawn to the smell of food. Suddenly, a massive bear lunges at him. Terrified, Charles falls backward and scrambles to escape, only to discover moments later that it isn't a bear at all. It is the crew members dressed in costumes trying to scare him. The entire prank was arranged by his wife because it is Charles's birthday and they wanted to surprise him. The group comes together with gifts and a birthday celebration. Though startled at first, Charles eventually relaxes and enjoys the party. His wife gives him a small watch while one of his assistants offers him a custom-carved knife, which Charles politely ignores. After the celebration, everyone heads to bed to prepare for the next day's outdoor photo shoot. The following morning, the team begins shooting in the freezing landscape. The photographer guides Meki, Charles's wife, into various poses while Charles watches from a distance. Bob's flirtatious attitude does not escape Charles's attention, and he dislikes seeing another man behave like that toward his wife. When Bob says he needs a male model to pose with Meki, Charles immediately volunteers, reminding Bob that Meki is his wife and they came together. But Bob refuses, saying the male partner needs to be young and attractive, not an old man like Charles. Bob is an old acquaintance from college who has always disliked him. While Charles became a successful businessman, Bob remained an ordinary photographer and seems determined to make things difficult. Despite Charles paying for the entire trip, Bob refuses to let him join the shoot and insists on finding another man to pose with Meki. The situation feels unfair, and Charles begins to question what Bob and Meki might be hiding. Suddenly, Bob notices a framed photograph of a man in rugged outdoor clothing. He immediately becomes excited and declares that this is the perfect model he has been looking for. When he shows the picture to the resort owner and asks where the man can be found, the owner laughs and explains that finding him won't be easy. The man is Kevin, a hunter who has lived in the Alaskan mountains for years. The owner gives them information about where Kevin might be found. Bob decides to go search for Kevin and the team prepares for the trip. Charles wants to explore Alaska from above and insists on joining them. Bob can't stop him, so they all board the plane and head toward the hunter's remote location. From the sky they gaze at the endless Alaskan mountains, unaware that they are flying straight toward a dangerous situation awaiting them ahead. When they reach the location marked on the map, the group expects to find the dangerous hunter they saw in the photograph. The area has several buildings and signs of activity, but the hunter is nowhere to be found. Instead, they discover a note saying he has temporarily moved to a different site and the exact coordinates are written below. After a quick discussion, Bob and Charles agree to continue the search. With a plane and plenty of fuel, they can cross Alaska multiple times, so they take off again toward the new location. As the temperature drops further, a much greater danger suddenly appears. A flock of birds crashes into the plane, throwing it off balance and destroying the engine. The aircraft plunges into the icy water below. The pilot dies instantly on impact, and the survivors struggle to escape the sinking wreck. Bob and his assistant manage to swim to shore, shivering from the cold. With no aircraft and no shelter, they huddle together. Fortunately, they find a small box of matches and manage to light a fire to stay warm as they wait for help, though the wilderness around them is completely silent except for animals in the distance. After some time, Charles decides they should attempt to find the hunter. He may be their only hope. They might also find supplies to survive the night and return to the resort the next day. Bob and the assistant agree, and the three men begin walking through the forest, unaware of the danger waiting for them. Not long into their journey, they hear strange sounds. Ahead of them, a massive brown bear emerges from the trees. The bear has spotted them and prepares to attack. Terrified, Bob and the assistant run for their lives, knowing that if the bear catches them, they are doomed. A brown bear is incredibly dangerous, and once it appears there is no time to lose. People can try placing burning branches between themselves and the bear, climbing to higher ground or lying still and pretending to be dead. But Bob and the assistant panic and run blindly into the forest, with the bear still chasing them. They reach a cliff with a deep waterfall ahead. If they jump, survival is unlikely. The bear closes in from behind and the path is blocked. Bob and the assistant freeze in fear, but Charles keeps a clear head. Using what he has learned from survival films, he grabs a fallen branch and creates a makeshift bridge across the gap. He tells Bob and the assistant to cross first and step carefully. Once they reach the other side, Charles is left alone as the bear approaches. It lunges forward, grabs the bridge and shakes it violently. Charles loses balance and hangs onto his bag for dear life. Inside the bag are several survival tools, including signal flares. The branch snaps and Charles plunges into the water below, hitting rocks and injuring himself. Fortunately, Bob and the assistant manage to pull him out downstream and drag him to safety. The bear watches from above for a moment before retreating into the forest. Shaken, the three men continue toward the hunter's location. Hours pass, but they still cannot find the place. It becomes clear they are lost or walking in circles. The temperature drops sharply as night approaches and they have no food. Thankfully, Charles still has the knife given to him earlier. He uses it to gather firewood and start a fire. Then he hands the knife to the assistant and tells him to tie it to a stick to catch fish at the nearby river. The assistant nods and heads toward the water while Charles and Bob maintain the fire. Soon after they hear the assistant screaming, they rush over and find him injured, having cut his leg while trying to fish. Charles bandages the wound and warns Bob that the bloody cloth must be burned or buried because the smell of blood can attract bears. Night falls, and Charles builds a small shelter for the three of them, as the assistant can no longer walk. While sitting near the fire, Charles realizes the bloodied cloth is still lying untouched. He walks over to retrieve it, but at that moment a massive bear emerges from the darkness. It lunges at the injured assistant and drags him away. Horrified, Charles grabs a burning branch and tries to scare the bear off, but the creature is enormous and roars fiercely. Bob panics and pulls Charles back. The bear kills the assistant and begins eating, and Charles, devastated, is powerless to stop it. Charles and Bob escape into the mountains with nothing but their clothes. With the assistant dead, only the two of them remain and they have no food or proper survival gear. By morning, snow begins to fall, making everything even more difficult. Using tricks he learned from survival shows, Charles sets small traps to catch animals and they manage to capture a small creature, barely enough to keep them going. Moments later, they hear the sound of a helicopter overhead. Charles and Bob wave desperately, but the helicopter flies too high and the dense forest hides them from view. They run toward a clearing, but by the time they reach open ground the helicopter has already disappeared. Furious and frustrated, Bob blames Charles, accusing him of being jealous and bitter because of his success and wealth. Charles refuses to fight and keeps his focus on survival. Still hungry and still being stalked by the same bear, they continue toward a nearby river. Charles tries to catch fish while Bob keeps watch, but from behind them they hear heavy footsteps. The bear is back. They immediately run deeper into the forest and spend the night there, surrounding themselves with a ring of fire to keep the animal away. They barely sleep, shaken by the danger around them. The next morning, Charles tells Bob the truth. If they want to survive, they must kill the bear. Bob finds the idea insane, but Charles is confident. He ties the sharpened knife onto a wooden pole and hangs a blood-stained cloth to lure the bear close. Seeing Charles's determination, Bob reluctantly prepares himself. Armed with makeshift spears, the two men face the approaching beast. The bear charges violently. Their weapons barely slow it down. The massive creature knocks Charles off a small ledge, injuring him. Bob tries to help but is attacked as well, suffering several wounds. Charles forces himself up and distracts the bear. When the animal turns toward him, he drives the improvised spear into its body with all his strength. The bear collapses and dies. Exhausted and shaken, Charles and Bob build a fire, cook the meat and wrap themselves in the outer layer of the bear's hide for warmth. For the first time in days, they have enough strength to continue their journey toward the hunter's cabin and eventually return to safety. But finding the right direction is still a problem. Charles takes out the small watch his wife gave him and attempts to turn the metal hand into a makeshift compass. By rubbing it repeatedly to magnetize it and placing it on a leaf floating on water, the hand aligns with the Earth's magnetic field. It's a difficult method, but in a survival situation it can work. Using this improvised compass, Charles determines their direction and they move forward again. Eventually, they spot a small house ahead. It appears empty, and no one answers when they call out, so they enter cautiously. Bob discovers a bottle of alcohol and begins drinking. Charles studies a map he finds inside and estimates the distance to the resort. They also discover a small boat they can use to travel downstream. While preparing to leave, Charles opens a box containing knives. Inside, he finds a receipt he had never noticed before. When he unfolds it, he discovers that both the watch and the engraved knife were originally purchased for Bob, not for him. The gifts were meant for Bob all along. That means his wife had bought them for Bob, not for her husband. In that moment, Charles realizes there has been more between Bob and his wife than he ever suspected. Charles is devastated by the betrayal he has just uncovered. When Bob steps back inside the cabin, Charles confronts him directly. Drunk and unable to hold back, Bob admits everything. Mekki never truly loved Charles. She stayed only for his money, and without it she never would have chosen him. Furious, Charles realizes how deep the deception goes. Bob then raises a gun toward him and threatens to kill him, marry Mekki and take all of Charles's wealth for himself. This had been Bob's plan all along, and now with no witnesses he is ready to act on it. But Charles stays calm, knowing Bob is drunk and unpredictable. Bob continues shouting that he will kill Charles, but while Charles slowly steps back, he secretly looks for a way to mislead him. He guides Bob toward a certain spot, and as Bob follows, Charles suddenly slips away to the side. Bob takes one more step and falls straight into a hidden pit, impaling himself on the sharp stakes below. If Charles leaves him there, Bob will certainly die, either from his wounds or from the bears that roam the forest. But Charles refuses to abandon his friend, no matter what Bob has done. He climbs down with difficulty, pulls Bob from the trap and places him inside the small boat they found earlier to continue their journey. Bleeding heavily and barely conscious, Bob looks at Charles and admits he has never been a good friend. He says he always wanted to be as successful as Charles but could never achieve that life, and feared Charles would cut him out forever. Charles tells him he forgives everything, because despite everything Bob is still the best friend he has. Hours later, they reach the riverbank and Charles lights a small fire to keep Bob warm. Bob's injuries are severe and he struggles to breathe. Charles tells him to rest and promises proper medical care once they get home. Bob apologizes again and insists that Mekki is innocent, that the affair was something Bob initiated, not her. Charles forgives them both, and the two men begin to talk more openly than they ever have before. Suddenly, they hear the sound of a helicopter overhead. A rescue team is passing through the forest. Because their voices are too faint to be heard, Charles quickly covers the fire with damp leaves, producing a thick plume of smoke that can be seen from far away. The helicopter changes direction and heads straight toward them. Overjoyed, Charles runs to tell Bob the good news, only to find that Bob has died moments earlier from his wounds. Heartbroken, Charles carries Bob's body to the rescuers. They return to the resort, where police and reporters are already waiting. Word of the disaster has spread quickly. Mekki is there as well, anxious to know what happened to Charles and Bob. Silent and thoughtful, Charles walks up to her and gently places the watch on her wrist, the same watch that was meant for Bob. Mekki immediately realizes that Charles has discovered the truth about her secret relationship. Whether he chooses to forgive her or not is now entirely his decision. Charles may be wealthy, but no amount of money can bring back his lost friend. He understands now that life cannot be purchased, and loss is something no one can escape. And with that, our story comes to an end.